Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 500. Yes, we are celebrating the 500th episode finally. I was able to get this episode out. It actually has been delayed for a little bit, which I'll get into for why. But yes, it is finally here. We have recorded 500 episodes, and that means we are at 10 years, or just over 10 years. And we decided to have, as our 500th episode guest, Mr. Steve Preeg, who was actually one of the very first guests ever on the podcast 10 years ago. And I thought it was fitting to invite him again. I got in touch with Steve. I hadn't actually talked to him in a long time. It was really cool. So we recorded this podcast, I think, back in November or something like that. But we're finally out, and it's super cool to be able to have him on. So what did we talk about? Well, we talked about a lot of changes that have happened in the industry in the last 10 years, and Steve is very, very knowledgeable in that matter. So, obviously Steve is well known for his incredible work that he's done on incredible shows like A Curious Case of Benjamin Buttons, which he won an Academy Award for, TRON Legacy, and a bunch of other things. He also talks about his experience working on the movie Cats, which I am sure a lot of you guys are curious about, as well as how he had an incredible experience working on Rescue Rangers, which is actually very interesting, and it's something I've really enjoyed watching as well. So really cool to hear him talk about that. I did go to his house, like I mentioned, to go see this, and he sort of lives out in the middle of nowhere, kind of, but sort of reflects on the fact that since the pandemic, how people are able to sort of change their lifestyles, especially in the visual effects industry, where you are able to sort of have this remote work done and sort of have a more or a different kind of work-life balance, and that's what he's sort of experiencing this time. So really great to have that. I do want to mention that, the podcast has been going through some changes. As you guys have probably noticed, you haven't seen them as frequently, and that's because I've actually been super, super busy. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to have the kind of assistance that I've had in the past in terms of helping with the podcast. So we've had to cut back a little bit in terms of what's happening. But this doesn't mean the podcast is going away. We just decided to cut back a little bit in terms of what we're doing. So instead of coming out once a week, we'll be doing them every 2 weeks. So that is the new schedule that's happening. It'll still be coming out on Mondays, but just every other Monday at this point. Additionally, due to the fact that the vast majority of our listeners are listening to these podcasts and not watching them, to be able to help with some of the workload as well, we decided we are going to cut the videos of the podcast. We're no longer going to be publishing videos on YouTube. However, this one is going to be a video, so this is probably the last video we're going to be doing. We might bring them back later if we have more time or things change, but this is the last video we're doing for the podcast at this time. So if you guys want to watch it, go ahead on YouTube and check that out as well. But like I said, we still have plenty more great podcasts coming up. In fact, I'll give you guys a sneak peek. Next episode will be with Eric Barba, who is also a great visual effects supervisor and also has an Oscar for the same film that Steve does, which is for A Curious Case of Benjamin Buttons. But one of the reasons I wanted to bring Eric Barba back is because he is nominated for an Oscar for Alien Romulus. So that will be for next week. So we're excited, or next episode, which is going to be in 2 weeks, like I mentioned. So anyway, a couple of other things I want to mention. Obviously, you guys know, if you want to follow our products, just go to chaos.com. Two big things I just want to make sure we get a shout out on is V-Ray 7 is out for a lot of our products, for Maya and Max and Cinema 4D, and others are coming soon. I believe Houdini will be coming out very soon. We also have a big update for Vantage. Vantage 2.6 is also out as well. In terms of events, a couple of events I want to highlight very specifically that are coming up very, very soon. First of all, the VS Awards is going to be on February 11th, and we will be there at the VS Awards. I'm very excited. I am going to be there along with several other people from the Chaos team, and we will be celebrating with everyone else. So hopefully we will be able to see you guys there. So if you're at the VS Awards, we'd love to see you. Also, not long after VS Awards, I will be at the HPA. retreat in Palm Springs, and I will be there with Vlado and Yorgi and a bunch of other people, and we will be doing several things there. We'll be giving a talk, which I'm very excited about, and that will on the main stage, and that will also feature Richard Crudo, our director of photography for a project for Ray Tracing for the Win. We'll be talking about Project Arena quite a bit. In fact, we will be at the Innovation Zone and showcasing Project Arena and talking about what's new in it, including what's new with and how Vantage has changed and how new things like DLSS 4 are going to affect Project Arena and its quality and quantity of work that you can put through it. So really exciting to do about that. So lots of things happening at the HPA retreat. If you happen to be there, we will be excited to see you there as well. All right. In terms of the podcast, same deal as before. Just go to chaos.com/CG Garage for all your podcast needs. If you like to watch the podcast, like I said, this is the last one that we'll be doing on YouTube for a while. It's going to be youtube.com/@CG Garage Podcast, youtube.com/CG Garage Podcast. If you guys have ideas of more podcasts or comments or questions or anything you'd like to do, just don't forget to email us, labs@chaos.com. But for now, please help us celebrate the 500th episode of the podcast with Mr. Steve Preeg.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
All right, so it's been 10 years since we did this last.
Which is crazy.
I don't think people realized that when you did that interview, this was a brand new podcast. You're like, sure, I'll do your podcast. You kind of got a little bit in trouble, didn't you? You got a phone call.
Yeah, there was a little bit of, there was something about how I was supposed to get permission from Digital Domain before I did it. And I'm like, okay.
Right.
But I mean, it's not like, I don't know, whatever. I wasn't super
I didn't know. I was brand new to podcasting too. I was joking about it. It's like, I should listen to your podcast that we did 10 years ago before coming up here. And I just couldn't do it.
Couldn't do it?
I couldn't do it, no.
Yeah.
No, it was too much. It's like, I listened to a couple older podcasts. And
I'll try to be better.
No, it's I need to be better. 10 years, I was the one who had to evolve as an interviewer.
I see.
So, so we got to talk a little bit about, obviously you want to catch up with you. So let's catch up with you a little bit. So 10 years have gone by. What has happened in the last 10 years? You were still at DD back then.
I was still at DD.
Yeah.
I left DD, I don't remember. I think maybe Beauty and the Beast was the last thing I did at DD.
Okay.
And then I was doing some test pieces. There was a test we did for King Kong and a test we did for a dog sled movie. I don't know if that was Togo or one of those things.
Right.
And there was a bit of a lull at DD, and they were doing furloughs and whatever. And I was like, I'm going to see what else is out there. So Joanna Capitano had gone off to MPC. So I gave her a ring to see what was going on there.
And Eric Nash was there too now.
Nash was there, yep. And so I gave her a call on like Friday afternoon. She's like, let's meet Monday. You know,
Okay.
I was like, okay. And so she says, you know, I have a project I have a need for right now for a VFX supervisor. You know, it's pretty immediate. You know, are you interested? And I'm like, sure, I guess so. And she said, you know, I was just going to be a contractor, not an employee of MPC.
Right.
And she said, you know, the director, he might be a little difficult. Like he may be, you know, but you've worked with Fincher. You know, like you've had some what people might consider tough. And I'm like, sure.
Okay.
Like that, okay. And that turned out to be Cats with Tom Hooper, who is, if you're listening, Tom, we're not friends. I won't say anything really bad about any other directors, but I'm not a friend of Tom Hooper's. He was just so cruel and mean and just,
It was a challenging show.
it was challenging in all ways. And, it's funny that, it caught a lot of sort of bad press about everything from the story to the VFX to everything. But, when it made the Bake Off, if you recall.
Oh, yes.
And part of that is because if you actually watch it, and, there was a number of different supervisors. I think I was there for pre-production, I was there for the shoot, and I was there for, 3 months of post or something like that.
Right.
And then Tom and I were not seeing eye to eye.
Mm-hmm.
So I went off to Montreal to just help in where the production was being done rather than be in the edit room.
Sure.
And that's when I was told after a couple weeks there that Tom was finding somebody else. And I'm like, thank God.
Right.
And I think he went through I don't even know how many supervisors are on that show.
Okay.
But anyway, there was a lot of bad press about the visual effects, which a lot of it, I think, comes down to very few decisions were being made early enough to get stuff done.
Sure.
And there was more people on that show than on Lion King.
Sure.
It was massive. And if you go back and watch the movie and realize that all the bodies are always fully CG, right?
Right.
And the animations actually, we had some of the best dancers in the world there.
Mm-hmm.
And the animation's actually pretty good.
Right.
And then for the face, the only part that's real is around the eyes and the mouth.
Right.
So we're tracking fur to the moving skin.
Right.
And there's not a lot of slipping going on there. If you look at where the glaring problems, in my opinion, with the VFX is, there's a lot of weird contact shadow issues or roto issues. And a lot of that was just time.
Just getting it done.
It was running out of time. But if you look at what went into that show, we had, I think it was 29 witness cameras on that show. We had custom stuff written for XN suits because we were running 10 suits simultaneous that had to be remote. When I got there, they're like, we're going to use XN suits. And I'm like, okay, how are you going to start and stop them? They're like, well, we're just going to run out on set and start and stop. And I'm like, you're kidding, right? This needs to be remote. We're not going to have time to run out there between each thing and start and stop on 10 different people.
Right.
Anyway, lots of stuff going on that show. And the people worked really hard on it. And I feel bad for the VFX artists, but I have to feel
Most of the bad VFX is bad decisions.
I think that's not atypical, right?
Right.
And
they also, when a story is bad, they love to blame the VFX for it.
Well, it's easy to blame VFX for everything in the end, right? Because we're sort of the last kid there.
Right.
Not last kid picked, I guess, but
yeah,
we're the last people there. There's no one else around.
Right. When they're hoping that we would fix the horrible thing that they've made.
Yeah.
And we can't.
And there was, it was one of those things that while it was being shot, Tom and maybe Universal and they were convinced that this was going to be sort of if you just ignore any kind of critical thinking about anything, and just whether you have to take mind-enhancing drugs or just let it go or whatever you need to do,
right?
It can be just a ridiculous fun movie, and it already has this weird cult following of people that go dress up as cats and watch this film, right? If that had been the way that the public received it, it could have been okay, that was someone tried this, it was insane, and they tried it, and it was fun, it was silly,
but it was very expensive,
super expensive. And at the same time, it's tough to do something experimental when the internet exists, because something comes out and it's almost like whoever the first people that respond to it is, if they're having a bad day and give it negative feedback, that'll spiral. If the initial thing had come out and be like, wow, that was insane. What did I just watch? I kind of had fun. Whatever, it could have spiraled. Who knows?
Right.
Where it could go. I mean, you could argue that cats would never spiral to the good, but whatever. I mean, I've seen some pretty funny graphs of the world was going well. Cats came out, COVID, the world went to hell. Cats was the cause of everything bad. But, it was definitely an interesting experience. I came back from that show, helped Eric Nash actually out on Call of the Wild for a bit.
Nice.
And then And then Rescue Rangers came up, which at first I was like, and not trying to throw shade at anyone who worked on any of the Alvin and the Chipmunks movies by any means, but it wasn't the kind of movie I wanted to make. Right? I was like, I don't really want to do another Alvin and the Chipmunks, like whatever. And then it was like, well, just read the script, and so I read the script, and then I found out that it was Akiva Schaffer directing, and it was The Lonely Island, and I'm like, oh, this is not Alvin and the Chipmunks. Like this is going to be actually the script was actually really fun to read.
Right.
And it was, an insanely ambitious movie. I mean, I think there was something like 1,200 unique characters in that show.
Wow.
1,450 shots. There was, I don't think there was a single shot that wasn't VFX. In fact, Akiva, there was, he kept saying, like, I'm going to make sure there's an effect in it. I think there are a few actual shots that don't have VFX in it that snuck through, but he was trying to make sure that every shot had visual effects.
That's interesting.
And in fact, there's a shot near the end where the detective is talking to an FBI agent when the whole thing's wrapping up, and he was a human. And in one of the, as Akiva was editing, he realized that she never spoke to a real human being in the entire film until that last thing. And he's like, I don't want that. Like, I don't want that. He has to be a cartoon character. So we replaced this poor actor's head with a cartoon because he realized that she never spoke to a human being. So why start in the last, minute and a half of the film?
Yeah.
Milo, are you taking all the attention away?
That's okay.
Yeah. And then after Rescue Rangers, there was a lot of sort of fires being put out on projects that, post-COVID, when there was such a big boom in visual effects and everyone kind of got behind. So I was helping out on Hocus Pocus 2 and Pinocchio and Argyle, and then got put on Aquaman 2 for a number of months. And then right around when Aquaman 2 ended was when, the writer's strike and then the actor strike and all that was going on. And I don't think that the visual effects industry or the film industry has recovered yet from that.
Right.
So there's a lot of people that are kind of looking at, is it survive till 25 is now the saying, right? Like,
interesting. Well, we'll get to that in a second, but let's talk about this. Like, where are we and how did you end up out here?
So
you don't have to be specific, but roundabouts.
So I'm in Murrieta, out kind of in the sticks. We're up in the hills. Our only internet access is really through Starlink.
Right.
Don't have cable TV because cable doesn't come up here.
Yep.
We're on a decent chunk of land with all of our fruit trees and garden and everything like that in the middle of nowhere where it's quiet. Which actually, if I had to thank Tom Hooper for anything, it would be that we're here now, because I was so miserable in London working on that show that all I could think about was retirement. Right. And so I kept sending links to my partner and saying, hey, we should go look at, property. What are we going to do with retirement? And she actually came down here a couple times. I used to just send her Zillow links.
So she was still here and you were in London.
Yeah, she came out for like, I don't know, 2 months or something like that. And she had a blast. I mean, she was like, I'm going to go see Stonehenge. One day she's like, I can take the train to Paris, have lunch in Paris and still come back for dinner. It was like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, but she was back here because I was in London for like a year.
Right.
So I used to send her Zillow links like constantly from this area.
And what picked you? Would you pick this area?
Because the weather is good.
Yeah.
It wasn't crazy expensive. It's getting worse.
Yeah.
We didn't want somewhere that was being cold in the winter.
Yeah.
And we wanted property. Like, we wanted space. We wanted to be away from craziness.
Right.
And we were looking at a number of different places, but this was actually a place where if we did buy, we were close enough living in LA that we could come here on weekends. It's only an hour and a half away from where I live.
And you're almost like halfway between San Diego and LA.
Mm-hmm. Yep. On the 15, not on the 5 side. Right. It used to be it still is a huge agricultural area.
Sure.
It used to be primarily avocados. Still has a lot of avocados, but now there's also quite a bit of wine growing.
Right.
Grape growing to make wine.
Right.
And so we decided when I got back from London, like, just for funsies, like, let's go pretend that we're ready to retire and get a realtor and look at houses, just whatever.
Right.
And then we didn't have so much luck initially, and then we found this place that had everything we wanted. Price was right, like it just had everything.
Right.
So we ended up buying it and converting our garage in LA into an ADU.
Right.
So we could afford a second mortgage. We were renting out the main house in LA, and we would come down here on weekends. And then COVID hit, and there was no reason to be in LA. It was much better to be out here where you can barely even see another house.
Right.
And, you know, stay away from everything. And then, you know, Linda has started being able to work full-time from home. I
Right.
was often having to travel anyway, depending on where the production was happening.
I mean, can you imagine, like, if 2018, 2017, you could say you can live out in the sticks and work remotely in your nuke session? No way.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah.
On a big Disney movie,
Over
let's say.
Starlink.
Yeah, over Starlink.
Yeah, exactly. over satellite Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Or, you know,
Yeah.
we're basically,
insane.
she's operating, she is a compositor. She's
Right.
a nuke compositor. So she's interacting with nuke over satellites.
Yeah.
Doing
remote login probably, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's all Teradici.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's amazing.
Yep.
And that makes your life is way better.
Yes. As we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
like I go to LA now and I just get stressed out for the entire time
Yeah.
I'm in LA.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
There's a bee.
Yeah. That's awesome though. I mean, that's kind of a big change that's happened in 10 years is how our lives have changed and
It
how
is.
much we do things and how we can
Yeah.
operate.
And when we first got out here, you know, Starlink didn't exist.
Sure.
And so she was having to rent a place. She was commuting down into town. She was renting like this little tiny, you know, basically large closet of an office.
Sure.
Because she needed internet access.
Right.
And then once Starlink, we signed up as soon as it was sort of beta.
Right.
And as soon as we got it.
And you don't have any trees blocking anything, so you probably get pretty good.
Yeah, well, we have a flat roof that,
Right.
you know, it sits up there and there's nothing blocking it.
Yep.
And it is, I mean, you know, say what you will about Musk at this point.
It works.
It is a pretty amazing thing to have. And, you know, our neighbor Johnny,
Yeah.
who does all the motorcycle racing, you know, they just have a mobile unit
Right.
that, you know, they're out in the middle of the desert in Mexico, you know, 200 miles from anything.
Yeah.
And they can track their racers, you know,
That's amazing.
through the internet.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's
So
amazing.
yeah, we're now out here full time, and we have our dog who
Yeah.
now has all the acreage to run around on, and we have all of our fruit trees and garden and relaxation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, I guess let's talk about the visual effects industry in general and how that has changed in 10 years. Because it was, you know, there's a lot has gone on. There's a lot, you know, back around that time, it was long. It was only a couple years after what I called the life of Pi days, right? When things were not looking great for the visual effects industry for different reasons. But I've tried to look back at that time and said, you know, why did people hate visual effects? Why were they so nasty to us for, you know, at the Oscars, et cetera? And I was thinking, it's like, they hated us because they sat there and filmed everything in a giant blue volume
Mm-hmm.
and hoped for the best. And they lost control of their films completely. And so they didn't like visual effects because they didn't have any ownership on it. That's changing a little bit. What are your thoughts on that?
It is changing some and not changing in other ways.
Okay.
Right? Like you could certainly look at what's going on with virtual production, for example, and say, now at least, well, we'll wait for Manuel to drive past. If that
That's okay.
does that interfere with?
It'll be okay.
good. Okay.
These are very directional. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
So, you know, the virtual production stuff, and that all started up, you know, during COVID. It was like, we want to keep shooting, but we can't go on location
Yes.
anywhere. So let's do everything with, you know, virtual production and LED volumes and everything. And which is great for certain things. I mean, they have limitations, significant limitations. If you can work around them, or if your script is such that it can work around them, it can be great.
Right.
But
It's
it
not
also,
a catch-all for everything.
it's certainly not a catch-all for anything. And I think this is the bigger problem with it, is it requires a lot of decisions to be made well in advance,
Sure.
right? much
Which is
earlier.
how people used to make movies.
Well, but now we're talking about even earlier,
Right.
because you could go into pre-production and do your set design and everything and build your sets, and then yes, you're shooting.
Sure.
But now we need to build everything digitally.
Right.
So you need the lead time to not only design it, but then give people time to build the assets
Sure.
and get it ready, right? Which now is basically telling studios and directors and every other part of the group that you need to actually make a call now rather than make a call in post.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people that don't like to do that.
Do you think they got spoiled by the post?
I 100% think they got spoiled. Not only direct, and I'm not saying that we should be blaming directors. I'm just saying that was the tool set that was given to them, right?
Right.
Like if you're building a house
Right.
and you go like, you don't need to make a decision until you're actually living in it.
Right.
And then you can totally redesign the house. If you realize that you want the bedroom further down the hall, you know, it's like, that's kind of the tool set that we gave directors.
Right.
And said, isn't this awesome?
Right.
And then we said, well, this is actually really a terrible way to do things now because
no one actually makes a
it's
decision.
super expensive and you put off decisions until the end.
Right.
Like, let's not write the third act until we've actually are well into post and realize how we want the movie to end.
Sure.
I think it also goes, you know, to the studios. It's like, you know, like when you sit in a screening and, you know, a random group of people that don't even know what movie they're going to watch, sit there, watch your movie and give you notes. And then you're going to now pivot and spend tens of millions of dollars because somebody said they didn't get something, you know, like, really? Like, that's the part to me that movie making didn't used to do, right? You wrote the script,
Sure.
you shot the script, and you showed that movie.
Right.
And there are certain directors, like, you know, maybe David Fincher, that he just goes, I don't care what the audience says.
Right.
Like, I'm making this film. You signed off on this script.
Sure.
You signed off on this story.
Yep.
That's the movie we're making.
Yep. That happened, I remember a specific, Mel Brooks, believe it or not, or most people don't realize, was a producer on Elephant Man.
Oh,
and
interesting.
He, and Fincher, not Fincher, David Lynch was the director on it.
Yeah.
And they showed a screening and people had notes and goes, oh, I'm sorry. You thought you had, no, you have no input on this. That is the movie.
Right. Did you enjoy it?
Did you enjoy it?
Yeah.
Great.
Which is why I think it should be.
But you remember, we had this on, you and I had this on iRobot. Remember when someone was confused? Someone's executive producer's spouse, like, I don't understand. This robot, is it this robot or that? We had to change all this stuff in post
but you
to
see it all the
make it less
time.
confusing.
You see it all the time. You see these comments where you just, someone says, I didn't get this.
Right.
And you're going, there's an entire scene that explains this.
Sure.
You were probably checking your mail.
Right.
You know, like, but one person in a screening says something. And again, not to throw shade at the average human being, because I probably am part of that average human being.
Sure.
But, you know, you see in these screenings where people go like, is there anything someone didn't understand? And someone will eventually, like, silence. Someone raises their hand and they're like, I didn't get this. And then they'll say, did anyone else not understand that? Right. And even though no one said anything, all of a sudden people are like, you know, and you're like, well, hold on a second. Like, did you really not understand? Or are you just sort of following along? Like, it is, I hate those test screenings because then you're just going like, oh God, here it comes. Now we're going to have to change everything in post.
Right.
You know, and they'll ask when you're shooting, they're like, you really need to LiDAR this set? Like, this isn't even a visual effects scene. And you're like, yet.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I'm covering myself for when it is.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we've given them so much freedom in so many ways, both the studio, the directors, like everybody, production designers, you know, often are just like, I'm not going to build it now. Like, you'll do that in post, right? Like, well, we didn't budget for that. It's like, well, yeah, but we don't want to.
Right.
It's like, okay. And so it's unfortunate, you know, like, and I think you can go back more than 10 years. You're talking about the differences in 10 years.
Sure.
And it's like, it used to be that visual effects was so hard that every single shot was like planned ahead of time. And it's like, how are we going to shoot this? Make sure you do this. Don't move the camera too much. Blah, 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 blah. And it moved through this weird time of like, now we can start being more flexible and allow for not having to plan so much or be such a drain on the production.
Sure.
And now it's just like, you know, go sit down, we're throwing up blue. Like, you know, just It's too bad.
It was interesting. So the DP on the short that we did, did you see the new
I
short?
did, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very cool.
So he's awesome. Richard Crudo is awesome. He was talking about like the old school days for him were back on film days, right? So he was, he was shooting things back in the 80s and stuff. He's like, we used to plan things because we were shooting on film. We used to plan things like a heist.
Yep.
Where everything was planned out, and super efficient. Every step that we knew exactly what we were going to do, so that the day we would make our shoot list and everything else. He goes, nowadays, because digital is free, they shoot everything like a smash and grab.
Yep. Like
you just get everything,
and
then the edit will figure it out later.
Yep.
And then, but the actors, you're never going to get their best performance because they're shot at 17 different ways.
I don't think anybody actually ends up liking the whole process.
Right.
It's like, it's a fix for something that I think wasn't a problem.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like,
sure.
We should be planning it.
Right.
And doing what we want to do. But because you can, like all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is better now.
Right.
Because now we can really cover ourselves. And it's like,
sure.
But now you've watered down the process of, creativity.
Right.
Right. So it is unfortunate. And I think it does make for not as good films.
Right.
It's people have sort of lost a focus because it's become everything.
Right. But you can't blame computer graphics for that. You can blame the process. We've enabled this through computer graphics in some way.
We have, and and there was I did a presentation with Rick Baker years ago.
Right.
And I was talking about a scene where we had to fix something where somebody didn't show up to the shoot, right? And we're reviewing the shot for the effects that we're adding. Right. And it was like, well, where's the actress? And they were just like, well, she had to go off to New York. It's like, well, but now you don't have your actress in the shot. And it was just like, well, you're just going to add her digitally. And, I was telling this story at this presentation Rick Baker was at. Right. And so he said, well, did you put her in? I said, well, yeah, of course we put her in. And he goes, well, then it's your own fucking fault. Right. Right? You have enabled them.
You enabled them.
Right. You just go like, well, you're going to have to cut around this.
Right.
Because you didn't put the actress in.
Right, right.
But yeah, it's definitely, you want to do things that can help the process, but it's a tool. And I think it's, I think unfortunately visual effects has become like it's turned into a Swiss Army knife when it really shouldn't be. Right. It should be a hammer that has a very specific purpose and you use it when you need it, and not something that opens your bottle of wine and hammers in a nail. Like that's not what this should be. Just like any other tool in the filmmaking process, you should treat this like it is.
Sure.
And it was interesting. I've never done episodic stuff, and about maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago or something like that, there was a need for coverage on a shoot on an upcoming MGM series called The Institute. And so I was called like on Thursday night and flew out Saturday morning to go cover a shoot for 3 weeks because the VFX supervisor's wife was having a baby or something like that. Okay. And I went up there, and I didn't even know this was a thing. Like I hadn't, I'd read the script and that was it, right? Like I was not prepared or didn't know anybody on the show or is up in Halifax. Right. And I get up there and it was actually very refreshing because they don't have a giant budget or a ton of time. Right. So they are trying to get everything in camera. Right. So when we're sitting there and they're like, the director's like, I don't really like the way this looks out the window. And they call me down and they call down, set dressing. Right. And
which one of you can fix this faster?
Well, and it was like, I was only there in case they couldn't figure something out. Right. But between the DP and set dressing, they fixed it all. Yeah. And I didn't even say, I was just sitting there. I was like, I'm not going to say we can fix that because we don't have the budget to fix it. Right. But you have a director that is totally on board.
So you were like last resort guy.
Yeah, instead of first resort guy.
Yeah, exactly.
There was no like, let's put blue out there and fix this later. It was like, how do we fix this? If we all can't figure this out, then we talk to this guy. Yeah. And I was like, this is awesome. This is the way it should be. Yes. Right? And I even thanked the director. I'm like, you know what? it was so nice to have that be the reaction.
Do you think the director was expecting you to try to be more involved, and you, or not?
I don't think so, because I think he actually also wanted to get it in camera.
Right.
Like, I think he understood, like.
But did he expect you to want to interfere more, or was he like happy to like, oh, was it refreshing that you said, I'm glad you didn't use me as much as you needed to?
I think he was just like, oh yeah, that's the way we want, that's that's what we want to do.
Right,
like,
right.
We understand our limitations,
Yeah.
and I feel like a lot of the big films that have these big budgets, they don't picture it as a limitation,
Right.
Like,
well, that's done. I think big budget films are, we're done with that for a little bit. They're not
maybe.
working so much.
They're not, the box office tanking issues has definitely caused a concern.
Right.
By the way, you're getting some light on your forehead. I don't know if that's going to end up blowing out the camera. if we want to move back a little
I'll
bit.
move back an inch. There you go. There you go.
But I don't think that's going to last.
Right.
Avatar 3 is going to come out. It's going to make $1 billion.
Avatar is an exception. I think Avatar is going to be fine. Listen.
No, it will.
It will. So, but let's look at Avatar. That's a great example. Avatar came out. The first Avatar came out. Everything went stereo for like 2 years.
Yes.
And then it all died down. Avatar 2 came out, and that was an exception. Everyone went to go see it in stereo, but you didn't see a bunch of stereo movies happen after Avatar 2.
No.
So I think Avatar 3 is going to come out, and everyone's going to go, this is another very expensive movie that's going to make all its money back. And that's
right.
done.
My point, though, is that there's going to be this, well, at least historically, there's been this reaction of like, box office is back. $1 billion box office is here again. And it kind of, like, there was this, like, almost happened when Barbie and Oppenheimer did well at the box office. And it was like, oh, the box office can do well. But then it was like, yeah, but Fast and Furious didn't do as well, and the Marvel movies aren't doing as well,
Right.
and so on and so forth. And I think that's what's causing a lot of the slowdown.
Sure.
The hesitancy of making these films. But is it a cycle? Is this just something where when a few box office things do hit, they're going to do these big films again?
The analogy that Dan Thron and I have been talking about, and Eric as well, is that this is like the 60s. So in the 60s, they thought they were going to make musicals and Doris Day films forever.
Yeah.
And just like they're like, we have, Disney bought Marvel and Star Wars, and they thought they were going to make Marvel and Star Wars for 25 years.
Yep.
That's not happening. So at some point, they burned everyone out, right?
Yep.
And so, but that moment gave birth to the 70s filmmaking, right?
Yeah.
So that gave birth
Right.
to Easy Rider, and that
Right.
gave birth to things like that. So to me, I'm looking at, I jokingly said, I believe that Everything Everywhere All at Once is the Easy Rider of today. It's the weird film, like, what the hell was that? That used visual effects in some weird way.
Yeah.
But that movie is completely chaotic, but if you really look at this, it's unbelievably planned out. They planned that movie out
Oh yeah.
like crazy.
Yep.
And probably why it's affordable is because they planned it like really
Same with
well.
Godzilla, right?
Same with Godzilla,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, we're back to the planning thing.
Right.
Like, to me, that's where the studios can make this affordable again, right? There was a joke on the Marvel movies, right? It's like, it's not done until we've shot it 3 times, right? It's like, well, there's your problem,
Right.
And at the time they're like, who cares if this movie costs us $350 million? We're going to make $1 billion,
Right.
right? But you could have made that movie for 150,
Right.
right? But you don't.
Or you could have made Deadpool for 25 million or whatever.
Well, whatever, Deadpool, it was probably more than
the
that.
first
but-
Deadpool, I think it was 25 million.
Was it 25?
Yeah.
I mean, you can, but if there's a desire to tell a story that doesn't take place on Earth, for example, or
Sure.
in this dimension, or whatever the comic
Right.
books, if you're trying to stay true to a story in the comic books that does take you somewhere where you need fully CG environments or fully digital characters. I mean, Deadpool was, I guess it had the Colossus guy. He was digital.
That was the second one.
Oh. Who's
No,
in
it
the
was
first
in the first one too.
one?
You're
Yeah, I
right.
think so.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, but it had the digital freeway. The digital freeway was pretty
did.
Yeah.
It did.
But it was still efficient. Like, I think it was.
It was. I agree.
think being efficient at filmmaking, and also I think that efficient filmmaking starts with efficient script.
Well,
Like an actual script.
And at the script stage, it happens at the planning stage. You know, it happens in, like, there are plenty of directors now who are like, I don't want to storyboard anything. I don't, I want to be there in the moment. And it's like, okay, but this is a big visual effects movie.
Right.
So being there in the moment, like, if you want to do a Blair Witch Project, be there in the moment. Like, I don't care, like, whatever.
Sure.
But when we have to do all this additional stuff, like, being there in the moment is not the best way to do this.
Yeah.
And in fact, there was, when I was at MPC, I had written up this big document that was, well, not big, but a number of pages, I guess. And it was sort of like my moment of, if I ever became a director, which I never want to do because it doesn't actually look like a very fun job at all. But if I was a director, the last thing that I would want to do is make a big visual effects movie.
Right.
Because it's not done in the way that you make movies, right? It's like, and this is when there's a lot of digital characters and stuff, and anyone who may watch this that read this, it's my analogy of, like, okay, the way that we do visual effects for a director, right, for a digital character, is you shoot your plate with a piece of cardboard there, or some guy wearing green, or whatever it is, right? And then we say, edit your film, do your voice over, or whatever, edit your film with your voiceover, lock your edit to within 8-frame handles, and then months later, when you see the animation, we hope that the edit works, right? So that's the equivalent of basically like doing a live action movie where you run around and shoot your whole film just with 2x4s with faces painted on it, right? Tell the guy, okay, edit your whole film, and when your edit's done, we'll bring in the actors and do the performance. And hopefully the edit still works, right? Like, that's basically what we're asking a director to do.
When in our short, that's why we use Rob Niederhorst as the guy who we just throw him into anything, like, hopefully it'll work.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, so what can visual effects as an industry, like, I feel like some of the onus is on us.
Sure, of course.
Right? As the visual effects industry. How can we make making a visual effects movie more like the way that a director is used to working?
We just got to be more involved somehow.
Well, yeah, like, what kinds of technology, for example, if you're doing digital characters, right?
Yeah.
And you have, let's say you've used witness cameras to shoot your voice talent doing the performance, right? So why can't we, in the post-viz stage, like, we know that we can do, like, deep fakes and things like that. So why not in the post-viz stage, can we not, if we basically are working on the character, right? We've done turntables, we've done animation tests, we've done render tests of our digital character, right? So we could do a training set of facial motion with our digital character. Then we could basically take our post-viz character and deep fake the face of our character from the actor's performance onto our post-viz. So we would actually see performance. That early in the stage. And it would look rendered, basically, because it would be a deep fake off of rendered data.
Isn't that not dissimilar from what they were doing on Here?
On Here?
The Zemeckis thing that Ulbrich did. So they had live performances. So
Here, yeah, the Tom Hanks, yes.
Yeah, Tom Hanks.
I don't know, I haven't seen anything behind the scenes. But you could argue that even the first Avatar with the kabuki masks, that kind of thing, right? But why can't that be taken way, way further? Right, that could look basically, so when you're editing your film, in theory, with real-time rendering happening in the animation phases, with post-viz potentially even using Unreal and doing animated characters, in that way, you could have something that looks like a cohesive film all the way from post-viz. Rather than having, like, gray shaded play blasts and post-viz that looks really funky here and there. Like, you could start crafting the film. And I'll give you an example. And on Rescue Rangers, there was a scene where, Akiva, again, was trying to work this way where, he's not going to see the animation to a shot until he's edited it, right? It's like, edit your shot, then we'll animate, which is insane to me, right? So he edits it, and he sees the animation, and the animation was fine, like, it looked good, And he's like, oh my God. And I'm like, what's wrong? He's like, we got to change the edit now. And it was like, and of course the visual effects company is like, you have a difficult director. He's changing now that, the animation is almost done. And his reasoning was, when he saw it as post-viz, there was zero emotion on the face.
Right.
So he had to linger on the scene and let the music bring in the emotion. So he had to let the music do the work.
Right.
Then he saw the animation, and the animation actually was good and brought the emotion to the scene.
Right.
Which now feels like you're milking your shot, because now you've got the emotion and you've got the music playing, and you're like, oh God, get off this shot. Like, why are we sitting on this? We get it. Right. And that's something where you just go like, there's no way, unless he could just go, I have faith, right? I have faith in visual effects that it's going to work, but he doesn't have anything to work with.
Sure.
He just has to work with what he has. And all he has at that point is an empty plate or post-viz.
Yeah.
So that's what you got to work with.
Right.
And then when he asks for a change, it's like, well, you turned this over already. We're already working to these 8-frame handles. Like, if you change stuff like that, you're incurring costs now. And it's like, it's so backwards, right? If he could have seen the expression on that character's face at the post-viz level, he would have gotten it. And we wouldn't have had that issue. And he would have been happier. And the editor would have been happier. And the visual effects company would have been happier. And everyone would have worked in a better way. So I think there is a lot that the visual effects industry itself could work towards to make filmmaking feel more like the process of filmmaking than edit this whole thing together and then we'll start the post process.
Yeah, that doesn't seem right. Yeah, that's good. And that's a great way, good analogies on why that's the reality of it. What about that idea of real time? And how do you think real time is changing things? I mean, obviously I know, game engines have come along, and I think that's great that they've brought in a lot of things into the game engine. I do feel that there's a lot of people trying to shoehorn game engines into a pipeline that doesn't work with game engines, but that's fine. At the same time, it brought everyone's game up a little bit more, where it becomes an interactive process in filmmaking. What we're doing in Vantage is trying to help along in that area as well. But what are your thoughts about real time and how it's going to work?
So I think real time can be used in a number of different ways. Right. One could be used like the way that you guys used it in your short.
Sure.
There are certainly cases where LED volumes are a good choice.
Sure.
Right. I think that there's certainly cases shown in some of the Star Wars episodic stuff where, as long as they know what the restrictions are, work around them, plan it, buy off on the assets, buy off on all that stuff ahead of time. Like if we try and shoot this in the sunlight, then it's going to maybe not look as real. So let's move this scene into the shadow of the Jawa walker thing. And that way we're in shadow, right? Like whatever. That's certainly one area that has its niche.
Right.
Like whether or not that will ever really be able to do much more than it's doing now, I don't know. Maybe if I
mean, it's really just fancy rear projection, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But it also, how many times you just throw a green screen back there and hope for the best?
Yeah,
right?
no, if you can get it in camera, but you do have issues with like getting more patterns or the way depth of field works.
Absolutely.
It's like you're defocusing an LED wall and then what are you doing with the background?
Yeah.
There's all sorts of issues.
We're working on that, by the way. Trying to figure that out.
That one's not an easy one.
No, it's not, because you're kind of double defocusing.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure like that's it's not a linear thing. Like it's not additive.
You have to keep it in focus up to the wall and then defocus after that.
But what if you don't want it in focus up to the wall?
Right.
So anyway, my point is there's limitations. So there's great uses for it, and then it falls apart in other places.
Right.
Another place where I think real time can be used is to what I was speaking about making. Oh boy, you're right in camera there, Milo. Come here. Some of this real time stuff that could be used, for example, in post-viz or even pre-viz, so that what you're seeing in pre-viz and post-viz looks more like a finished film.
And that helps the edit.
That helps the edit. That helps the director. That helps the studio execs. That helps everybody see what's happening.
Sure.
And I think even for final picture, it's like if you have a bunch of background stuff that you're doing and you can do trees and everything in real time and not have to kill your render farm by rendering stuff that's going to be out of focus in the background.
Right.
Like there's plenty of stuff I think that could be rendered in real time that could be put into movies and no one would care.
Sure.
Right. Whether or not that's your, full screen character stuff or whatever,
right.
There's still plenty of places, especially if there's a pipeline that can take assets from, let's say, if you're doing it in V-Ray and you can render it in real time in V-Ray, then you don't care. You can either render it offline or you can render it real time and
sure.
Depending on your need, use the same asset, or whether you need to come up with a pipeline to port it into Unreal or whatever you want to do. Like there's
sure.
cases where you could do it. I think there's also the real-time rendering aspect of animation.
Right.
If I don't know if you were still at DD, but at DD we had gotten real-time rendering going
for
for animation.
For Digital Doug was one of the.
Well, it was. I think the first thing that we used it in was one of the Avengers movies.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. For Thanos.
And like the animation approval process was like 100 times fast. It was like 100.
Sure.
It's like, okay, it's in a dark room and motion blurred. It looks fine, right? But if you see it a play blast out of Maya, then you're stopping it and you're going like, the expression's weird there, and it's like you will never see that ever.
Yeah.
And again, we go back to screenings and watching the movie, and it's like, how many times have you seen a screening where it's like, well, we're still using the post-viz here, or an old version of anim that was rendered or something because we want it to play, right? And if we drop in the latest anim and it's a play blast and it's going to jump between a render and play blast, then you're constantly watching the wrong version of the film because the director doesn't want to watch it in that format, and I don't blame them.
Sure.
So you're in a rut where when you're watching the movie in context, you're always watching a really old version.
Yeah.
And so you're never actually watching the correct thing.
Right.
So get animation using real-time renders, get backgrounds using real-time renders, and maybe eventually we're doing full features in real time. Like that's fine.
Right.
If it can be done, like, but that's not where, there's some stuff that I was involved with of trying to get a full feature way down in price by going real time.
Right.
And you start to realize that like that's not necessarily where the cost of making an animated feature is in render time, right?
Right. That's surprising though, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's artist time, right? Like you still have to animate everything.
Yeah.
So, you still have to light it, and you still have to build the assets, and you still have to texture them. And so when you actually boil it down and go, well, how much would we save if we could take rendering out of the equation?
You save your time in decision making, right?
Yes. I mean, you could make that point. You could definitely argue that point that you're doing more iterations, but does that just mean there's more times of them asking for a change?
Yeah, I don't know.
Because in many ways, that's the way a movie gets done, right?
Sure.
And it's just like any piece of art. Like there's that saying that the movie is done when they take it away from you and they release it.
Sure.
Right. Up until that point. That's why it was always a joke when they go like, oh, well, visual effects is supposed to wrap in, April and the movie comes out in December. And you're like, okay. Like you're going to tell your director like 8 months before it's supposed to come out that he's done.
Yeah.
Like, have you ever met an artist?
Yeah.
Like, that's never going to happen.
Right.
And so if you do more iterations, does that just mean there's more changes? Maybe.
Right.
But I think that speaks to having producers and studio execs hold directors accountable and just go like, look, make a decision and do it.
Right.
Which brings up another point, to be honest, which is probably my frustration the most with what has happened with visual effects. Is if you go back and watch all the great movies that were sort of pioneers in visual effects, whether it was, Jason the Argonauts or Ghostbusters or Poltergeist or anything like that, right? You don't care. Like, you knew it wasn't, like, there was never a moment watching Jason the Argonauts where I was like trying to think like, is that a real Cyclops? Like, it looks totally, like, it's not real.
Right.
You don't care.
Yeah.
The skeleton fight, it was cool looking, like that was fine.
Right.
But it wasn't like that pixels off. Like I didn't care, right? But today's audience, like I look at shots. I was just looking at a shot this morning and I was like, the edging that is being talked about on this thing in the background, right? When there's a clear focus in the shot, everything else is out of focus. You're looking at a guy's face, right? And it's like, let's pick apart that thing that's moving in the background.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be a weird edge. And you know why we do it? Because there's going to be a bunch of people online that go, oh, yeah, compositing was terrible. Did you see those edges? And you're like, what were you watching? Because you clearly weren't paying attention to the story because you wouldn't be looking at that. What are people looking at? Why do you care?
But I had the same argument when people were talking about how they said Jurassic World was worse than Jurassic Park, right? And I was like, because it was all CGI and Jurassic Park was practical, which is bullshit.
No,
right?
Totally.
It's like the reason Jurassic World is a worse movie is there's no story.
It's because it's a worse movie.
It's a bad movie.
Jurassic Park, like the first 45 minutes or maybe 40 minutes of Jurassic Park is just some of the best filmmaking ever.
Yeah.
And the dinosaurs aren't in it yet.
Yeah.
Like you are so engrossed at that point, right?
Right.
Like you just, I don't know. It is. And that's what people pay attention to now.
Sure.
And you're like, I was just, I was talking to someone about that Here movie, you know, and there had been like bad press about like, you know, whether the visual effects were good or bad or whatever.
Right.
And my point is like, the visual effects is there to tell you something. And it's to tell you the age of Tom Hanks at that time.
Right.
Now, if anyone watches that film and goes like, I don't understand how old he's supposed to be here, then the visual effects failed.
Sure.
If you watch it and you go, oh yeah, he's 25-ish.
Right.
The visual effects did its job, right?
Right.
So why do you need to go then, but he looks a little bit funny? Because it doesn't matter. The visual effect has told you what it's supposed to tell you.
Sure.
He's 25.
Sure.
Right? You don't need to care about whether it's that polished.
I think
nothing on set is that polished. Go onto a set and look at the props, and everything is so fake.
Sure.
Right?
The whole thing is like a play
matter.
anyway. The whole thing is shot from a single camera point of view, right? So the whole thing is very experimental. So people are going to react to it as in like, I don't get it, right? A lot of people do, right? And that's fine.
But that's just an example. That's just, it could be any visual effect.
Yeah,
it could be cats, right? Like, let's go back to cats.
Right.
I know that people want to hear about cats, right? But the point is, you get what it is.
Right.
Who cares if I get it. We want to make the contact shadow look right. Like,
sure.
Fine, whatever. That's great. Let's make the contact shadow. If we have the time and the money, we'll make the contact shadow look right. The point is, you get it.
Right.
They're people cat things. If you don't like people cat things, which apparently most humans don't,
it's a little weird.
That's fine. Right? But it wasn't confusing. The visual effects did what it was supposed to do.
Right.
So why are people so bothered when they say, oh, I want to see it practical? Like, if you watch it practical, there are just as many flaws with it.
Right.
Right? Like, we can go back to Jurassic Park, right?
Sure.
When it was the physical T-Rex.
Right.
It looks awesome, but if that was digital, people would go, the motion's a bit funky.
Right.
Right? Just because it's digital.
But
you don't care because it's practical?
What's even better is that it was digital and practical.
No, it was, but I'm saying the practical shots.
You can't tell the difference. Most people will not tell you which one is practical, which one's digital. They don't know.
Right.
Right? And that was in '93.
No, it was amazing. I mean, it's still amazing, right?
Sure.
But my point is, if there was a practical thing where there's something weird in the motion, like it's a little bit jerky or something like that,
right?
That's okay if it's practical.
Right.
But it's not okay if it's digital. And that's what I'm saying. Who cares? Who cares if the animation is a little bit jerky?
Yeah.
It was when it was practical. It was when it was stop motion. But it didn't matter. So why are we so hung up on it?
Because I think we don't have enough story anymore. And I think we're...
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Like, but that's not what people are focused on either.
Well, do you think it's because we forgot about how to make a good story? And we just, it's producers that don't know the story, but they think they can control the visual effects instead?
I mean, I don't think it even has to do with visual effects at that point. Like, I think there's plenty of things that, whether it comes down to like political things or, you know, social, like it's just so, the idea of a movie has so much lost its way, right? critics, for example. Like, I feel like if you're going to be a credible critic, you should have had to work in the film industry for like 10 years and see what it's the like controlled chaos of what it is to be on set and make a movie.
Sure.
Because when you go like, did you notice that they did this and that he was holding his hand over here, and then the next shot when it was edited, the hand was over here. It's like, why did they do that? And you're like, probably because it wasn't even shot in order. Like maybe even the edit, there was a shot in between when he moved his hand. Like, who cares? What are you watching? Why are you watching that?
Yeah,
you know, like,
yeah.
So I think that there's just this weird desire now to like look at the trees instead of the forests, so to speak, when you watch a film.
But do you think that, so we're at a change. We're at a change that's going to happen in Hollywood. There's going to be a change of filmmaking. I don't think we can go back to producing, Marvel film after Marvel film.
Yeah.
People have been saying that there's going to be a resurgence of independent films.
I hope so.
And that's going to, like in the 90s we had a big independent film movement. Where does visual effects that we know today, where does that live in that world of let's make a cool movie that's affordable?
I mean, hopefully it goes back to a support role.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, hopefully it goes back to just put it where we need it rather than rely on it, because that's where the money gets eaten up. And if you have something complicated, like I say, creatures that can only be digital in an environment that is on another world planet, like, okay, that is going to be a bigger thing to do. It's just like visual effects was, 20 years ago when you read a script and you're like, oh my God, like, that's going to be massive. Like, how are we even going to do this? Like, those questions aren't being asked anymore. It's just like you read a script and you go, yeah, it's 1,800 shots and it's going to be tons of this and tons of that. And okay, here's a number. And it's like, let's go back to, all right, where do we have to put visual effects and how can we use it efficiently and how can we minimize the number of builds and how can we plan it so that we're not fixing everything again later? And, if they want to save money and make cheaper films, I don't necessarily think that you have to compromise on always telling a story in a single room with 3 people. Like, you can do other stuff, just do it intelligently, right? Control the situation. But I also do think, and this is probably a somewhat unpopular opinion, but if you look at the progression of AI tools for filmmaking, I don't think it's going to be that long before you're going to have people able to make pretty consistent, good-looking, completely AI-generated movies at home. And that's when it's going to be interesting to see, because you can just go on Reddit, for example, and like read comments and go like, wow, there's some people that have really interesting things to say, or some people that have really good sense of humor, or people, there's a lot of people that don't, but there's a lot of really intelligent people out there that have a lot of interesting things that they could be saying.
Yep.
They just had no mechanism to actually say it.
Sure.
And so if you have now, like, you can find these little gems of like, there's this, I think it's a Warhammer thing. It's like some fan-based, fully CG Warhammer thing that there's no dialogue, there's no, but it's just super compelling and cool to watch, right? And if you can now do that without having to have people building and texturing and animating and do all that and just use AI, I think you could see some really interesting stories out there.
What are your thoughts about that? Like, about how AI is going to change visual effects?
I think that there's
We've been using it, obviously. We should talk about the fact that you've been using this long before it was called AI, right? You would build digital human stuff for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, this whole machine learning thing has been used for a long time. This whole worry by the actors about these AI scans that were happening during the actor strike, and it's like,
we've been doing that for 20 years.
There was a documentary thing made about it where it's like, it's a light stage. Like, it is exactly what we've been doing for 20 years. It's just now it's got a label of AI scan, so it's terrifying.
Right.
And, like, it has been a progression, and there's tools that we've been using that are AI related in some way, machine learning and machine vision tools.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely going to something different. I think that short-term wise, there'll definitely be our industry for a bit, because there's going to be that desire to like really direct something, like not feed something in and go like, well, it's pretty much what I described, but not exactly what I was thinking, right?
Right.
There'll be directors that want something very, very specific.
Right.
But I do think that over time, those tool sets are being developed at a rate that is insane.
Right.
Like if you look at what has just happened in 1 year,
Yeah.
between what you could do text to video a year ago and how now you can start to direct things, generate your storyboards, break down scripts, generate scenes, like do all that kind of stuff, even as a starting point.
Right.
I mean, it's just going to be like going to digital cameras or whatever. There's going to be this resistance to like old school filmmaking, but it's a tool. And it's,
what do you think about people's reaction towards it? They're people were worried about CG as far as it taking jobs, but now they're worried about AI literally stealing people's work on top of taking jobs.
You know what? It's like, I think James Cameron just said it the other day. It's like, once the genie's out of the bottle,
Right.
like it is a tool. You
Right.
could go back and go like the printing press. What did the people that wrote books?
You're talking about the one where he talked about general AI or general intelligence versus regular intelligence. It was a good little talk he gave. I was actually pretty impressed.
Yeah, I just
Even
think
Scott Ross said it was good.
I mean, and I don't want to take Scott Ross's job here of being the doom and gloom guy about visual effects.
Yeah.
But it's just coming. Like
Right.
it is what it is, and you can either embrace it or not. You could either embrace CG when it came out. You could either embrace the printing press. You can embrace the cotton gin, like all these things that have come out. And it's not just our industry. I mean, if anything, we're better off than a lot of other industries, like paralegals. It's like when all of a sudden every law book ever is searchable and can,
Sure.
like, or, I mean, there's so many different jobs that are going to get affected by this.
Right.
So it's not just like visual effects or artists in general. I think there's going to be a need for, very specific art when people have the money and the time and the directors and stuff that want to be very specific. But, like if someone was going to make a splash screen for an iPhone game, like why would you pay an artist when you can use Midjourney and create it? Like it doesn't matter what it is, right? It's just some art that you paste onto the front of your app or whatever.
Well, there's a lot of concept artists that are really kind of freaking out about this, right?
And I don't blame them.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly.
I mean, Dan TRON also said his job of matte painting, that's gone.
There's a lot of jobs that are going quickly. And I mean, you can be against it, but it's like just being against, it's like standing up against a tidal wave, right?
Right.
Like, what are you going to do?
Right.
You're going to stand there, you're just going to drown.
Right.
So like quickly make a canoe. I don't know, like it's coming.
Sure.
So you can be angry about it and complain and say, we shouldn't allow this.
Right.
And like what the writers did with their strike and how they got sort of this agreement with AI not being used to write scripts. It's like, okay, that's going to delay it for what, 2 years, 5 years, like whenever the next, negotiation comes up. But like, it's just going to happen. Right. And especially if you get to a point where, someone in their mom's basement can make a movie using AI, and they can use AI tools to write scripts or help them write scripts based on a concept that they have. Like, I get it that it hurts our industry, but if someone has a really interesting idea that they want to put to film, right?
Yeah.
And they can use AI to write the script and use AI to generate the movie, and then I can watch it and enjoy it. Like, I don't understand. Like, I
get it.
It's still just something that I can consume. And if I like it, I like it. And if I don't, I don't.
Right.
It's like photography. Is photography art?
Right.
I don't know. Like, probably someone that painted in the 1800s and is like, that's not art.
Right.
That's just copying reality. You're not even doing anything. You're just hitting a button. I paint this.
Yeah.
And it's like.
Well, that's actually a good point, because I think and the same is said with architecture. At one point, if you built something out of metal, it wasn't considered architecture. It had to be built out of stone.
Right.
This was back in a long time ago. Obviously, it's like, that's engineering, that's not architecture. It's like, okay. But at the same time, I think people do confuse art and craft, right? Like, because you know how to brush on a Wacom tablet doesn't mean you're an artist.
Right. Sure.
So.
And, I think that the AI tools that are out there even now, like, for example, Midjourney, right? Like, to me, if that's something that a director can start to use instead of, say, Google, because let's face it, when a director's putting together a mood board or some ideas or something,
they just look
use
up Google Images.
Right? So now, instead of using Google Images, they can actually sort of prompt things and trigger ideas in their head.
Right.
Now, whether or not that gets used as the final thing, but if it was something that they can bring to, a VFX house or a concept artist or whoever it may be, or an art director or whoever it happens to be, and say, hey, I generated this thing, here's what I like about it, here's what I don't. All that does is progress everybody a little bit faster, right?
Yeah, in fact, for our short, Eric did all the mood boards. He started with old Westerns, just like Google, right? I want a little bit of flavor of this, little flavor of that, little flavor of this, and then created all these images in Midjourney of like, here's what the bar car would look like. Guess what? It looks exactly like that. And it made it much easier to like, now I get it. That's what it's got to look like. Yeah.
And if you have directors, for example, that aren't artists in terms of like hand drawing or whatever, like, great, give them tools that allow them to like generate a storyboard to tell you what they're thinking, or to even generate a camera move.
Right.
Like, if they can sit there and hammer on the keyboard for a while and then bring something and go, this is what I was thinking.
Yeah.
How much time does that save, as opposed to him describing it to a visual effects supervisor, who describes it to a visual effects company, who does an iteration, who gives it back and shows it to him, and he goes, that's not what I was thinking. And you go like this, whereas he can spend an hour like spitting out 57 versions where he says, this is pretty much it with this small change.
Yeah.
Like, great, use it.
So let's do this. We've gone over an hour, but let's talk a little bit. Some advice. Like, this has been 10 years. Someone starting off in the industry, start either as a visual effects person or as an artist or whatever they're trying to do, or filmmaker. What would you give them advice to, what to do now to prepare for the next 10 years?
I mean, I'm probably not the right person to ask, but what I would do is embrace the new tool sets.
Right.
Like, I would get behind it.
Yeah.
I would like pull a Phil Tippett. Just be like, maybe I don't like it, but I know it's coming, so I'm going to make a visual effects studio. Right. We're not just going to stick with stop motion because I know it's happening. Right. So I'm going to embrace it. And, he made a successful visual effects company, and they did some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
So, if you can get out ahead on that kind of thing. I'm not the right person to say what to get out ahead on because it's changing so quickly. I mean, but, if you can get out ahead on that kind of thing and be someone who really understands how to leverage the new technology, like, I feel like that's going to be the people that are in demand, right? Right. Like, and whether or not that's someone who has a little bit more of a computer science background as well, like the environment stuff, like, are Gaussian splats going to be just like dominating the way that we do environments later?
It's looking pretty good.
Maybe, right? Or at least in some cases. Right. So educate yourself on, keeping up on the technology, because it's changing so rapidly that it's not like it used to be, whereas like, oh, this year we get dynamics in our,
No, it's Maya. Every week.
Yeah. And if you're on top of that and you can, I mean, to me, that's sort of the advice, but that may be something that only lasts 6 months anyway, and then it's accessible to everyone through a UI. I don't know.
It'll be funny to see, like, in 10 years, like, if Gaussian splats is a thing still.
Probably not.
Probably not.
But it's on the right path, right? It's going the right direction. I mean, because the what was the thing? The nerfs. Right. Like, that lasted how long before Gaussian splats were like, this is probably better for us?
Well, because they're way simpler.
Well,
But
and
what was before Nurse? Before Nurse was light fields. Remember light
yeah,
fields?
yeah, yeah. So it's like it's changing so quickly,
Right.
you know. I mean, I don't think that visual effects and filmmaking, as we see it now, is around for the long term.
Mm. It's just going to be part of the whole process.
Yeah.
So you think the idea of how we've been managing post, your advice generally is like, we need to manage post differently. We need to go back to being a support mechanism, and then visual effects just becomes the correct tool for the right moment, right?
Yep. And I think, you know, one thing that would benefit visual effects artists, especially as these tool sets get easier to use, is less to necessarily be educated about visual effects and more to be educated about the language of film and filmmaking and what a director wants from you as a visual effects artist. You know what?
You're speaking my language. I love this.
I mean, it's amazing how many times you're talking to visual effects artists about
they have no
their
idea
shots.
how films are made. Yeah.
No idea how it's made. What is their shot even about? How does their shot fit into anything? What's important in their shot? Why is the shot even in the movie?
Right.
Right? Like all those questions for someone who is, and I don't blame the visual effects artists because they're in a box. Right. They're just handed like, here's your shot, do this thing.
Right.
And it's like, okay, is this the thing? And it's like, well, no, that doesn't fit into the theme of the movie at all.
Right.
And it's like, they don't know. They haven't seen the movie. They haven't seen the script.
I had this conversation with Richard about it, and it was like, I used to sit in a box and try to guess that I was the DP on the shot, and I'll just make it light, I guess, the way it was supposed to be lit.
I mean, that's a good example is like, you know, lighters and visual effects who go like, well, no, it's right. I use the HDR.
Right.
It's like, yeah, but that's a digital character. And so the DP didn't have anything to light there.
Right.
So there is no light for the character.
Right.
It's like, no, but we have the HDR. That's the lighting. And it's like, that's the lighting for the room and the real character. But there was no lights for the digital character because there was nothing to light.
Right.
So now you have to be the DP.
Yeah.
And look at the reverse of that. So you know how he lit the real person.
Right.
Or look at other movies by the DP or whatever it happens to be and see how they do this.
Yeah.
Or other scenes in the movie or whatever it happens to be. And the visual effects companies in general, I don't think support that too much anyway, because it's not like they're out there going like, let's get everyone together, let's watch the day, you know, something from this film so everyone understands the tone of the film and whatever. It's like they're just throwing shots at people.
Well, I think what was cool, that, like in terms of the ICVFX stuff, is like, you know, we were shooting our short, and our DP was looking through the camera, and he was changing things in the set, and he realized, oh no, that's on the wall. That's not in real life. Right. And so he's like, all right, hold on a second. And he went back to talk to Vlado. First of all, having Vlado as the guy who's lighting your set is hilarious. And so Vlado, I need this highlight to be here. And then by the time he walked back to the camera, it was changed. And he's like, it was like it was all real, right? And so I would not have known to do that.
Yeah.
Right? The DP made that choice for a reason, to balance everything, you know? And so having the DP and a director take control of the visual effects and CG.
So it's interesting you bring that up, because Rescue Rangers was actually, sorry. Rescue Rangers was in pre-production before COVID. Then COVID hit, and then we were put on hiatus for a little bit, and then we started up production again. But when we started up production again, we weren't allowed to go into our office. We had to do remote. And we had set up a small virtual production stage because like half that movie approximately is all CG, and a lot of it takes place in, you know, little chipmunk size rooms and stuff like that. So even if we had built it, we couldn't shoot it, like whatever. So we had built this little room, and we were going to have the DP, Larry Fong, was going to be able to use all, you know, shoulder rigs and tripods and everything to virtually shoot all this stuff. But then we couldn't use the space. So I called Larry one day, and I was like, well, first I talked to some of our people at MPC, but then so we decided, it was like, if we can get Larry on board to where we give him a tutorial in Maya, and we give him scenes where everything's basically locked. He can't do anything except manipulate the camera. And we give him just the controls for the camera. Would Larry, our DP, be willing to sort of just work in Maya?
Right.
And he was like, that sounds awesome. Like, let's try it.
Right.
And so we just started boxing up all of our previs
Right.
and sending it to him and going like, here's how you move a camera. Here's how you adjust the parameters on the camera. Like, start giving us shots.
Right.
It was because everyone had to work from home. We couldn't get together. We could and so we just set him up with a computer with Maya and set him up on, we didn't even set him up on the network. We sent him the files and he did a whole bunch of the camera work at home in Maya and sent us back the files. And then we're like, great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So if you could, sort of like we've tried to do with virtual production and give the DP a camera to hold and work in the virtual environment. Like, even
I did that. I planned a lot of the shots on our short in my living room using a Vive camera.
Yep. So, giving them tool sets like that, giving them, even if Maya had a sort of DP friendly system that you could, directly feed into Maya and you could see things and, even have almost like live sessions of Maya where a DP sitting there when, someone's in Maya and he's like, okay, can you move the box over to here? And like you said, move the picture on the wall or do something like that.
Right.
And he's sitting there just with a virtual camera and you're all sort of interacting, whether it's in Maya or Unreal Engine, so you can do some lighting stuff or wherever it happens to be. Like, those are the kinds of things that I feel like as an industry, and it doesn't just include like a digital domain or an MPC or a WETA or something like that. It could include like Unreal and all sorts of collaborators where you're making a system where you all work together with the tool set to make it feel like the director is directing a live action film, which we don't do right now at all. When there's
you should look at Jet Set. Have you heard of Jet Set?
Mm-mm.
You should look at Light. I think it's Lightcraft is the name of the company, but they make a product called Jet Set, which is basically using iPhones or iPads and virtual camera.
Oh yeah. There's a number of those.
But the Jet Set guys are doing are pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty interested in that. But
yeah, I know there's a few developers that have been working on one of the DPs on that TV show I was talking about in Halifax. He had gotten together with some developers and made his own thing to be able to go out there on set. So he was asking for assets from us, like, hey, can you get me this building that's going to be digital later, so that when I'm out on location, I can just drop it in and frame things up. And he was tech savvy enough that he was interested in doing that.
That's awesome.
But I think getting the filmmakers involved in I don't know what he's eating. Getting the filmmakers involved in in our process and making our process accessible to them.
Yeah.
So that it doesn't feel like we're just the redheaded stepchild that they have to go to.
Right.
And they don't really enjoy it because we cost a lot of money and we're slow, to be honest. When they ask to see something, when you're on set and they're like, I need to see this, it's like 20 people run around and make it happen in the next 30 seconds. Right. In post, they're like, I'd like to see this. And it's like 2.5 weeks from now, we'll show you a temp version of that.
I remember this was an exact example, and I wasn't on the show, but it was someone said a story about they were on Polar Express, the original Polar Express, and someone said, there's too many Christmas balls on that tree. Can we just remove like 7 of them? And it pointed them out with a laser pointer. It's like, got the note, great. You'll see it in 1 week. It's like, why is that? Why does it take a week to do that?
Exactly. And it was, very interesting on Rescue Rangers as well, because it was the first real comedy that I had done. And I had sort of been warned that, in live action shooting, they always say like, don't shoot with kids or animals because that just makes it more complicated.
Right.
But in visual effects, it's like, don't do a comedy.
Okay.
Because it's so much about just frame accurate timing.
Yeah.
And that's when it became much more clear about this whole editing with a board, with nothing, because then you see the performance and it's like
the joke doesn't land.
The joke doesn't land.
Right. Yeah.
There was so many times, and there was times when Akiva, he was great to work with. I'm not by any means casting shade on Akiva, but there was so many times where he would be like, I know this joke is going to land, but it's not working in post-viz. But I think it's going to land when we actually see it, and then it's like, does it work in anim? It's starting to work in anim. Oh, but then when we rendered it, it actually bombs, right? Because something happened. Or, why does this joke land in previs and not in the final render? Or why did it not work in previs and land in and it was so nuanced when it comes to comedy that you have to be flexible. And so there's just constant changes of the edit, retimes here, and just this changes just a little bit, or the edit slipped, or, you know, just constant changes.
Right.
And I don't blame him at all.
Right.
And that's what I'm saying, is that we don't make it easy for them to make a movie.
Right.
We make it very hard.
Right.
Especially when it comes to something that really, you know, like an action scene in a Marvel movie doesn't matter as much. It's like just stuff flying everywhere and explosions and whatever. But when it's like a subtle joke or a subtle timing or something like that, and they don't have the performance,
right?
Like, what do we expect?
But like, we even have an example. While we were shooting this, the UPS truck showed up. Those boxes showed up over there. We were already talking about how we can remove those boxes from the from the
and
shot.
Now the sun's hitting you in the face.
And now the sun's hitting me in the face. So obviously we know. But if people are paying attention to that and not to what we're actually saying,
that's on you. This is your podcast.
then I've done a shitty podcast. But that's the point, right? It's like so those that's, I think, what's going to be interesting. But yeah, I think it's great. I think that I'm trying to be optimistic. I know that people see a lot of doom and gloom. I know people have been out of work, and that's sad. But I know that people are going to. The film's going to adapt. People still want stories.
Yeah.
They still want great stories, and they still want good movies. And I think it's still a great format to have a story being told in pictures over the course of 90 minutes to 180 minutes, you know?
Well, that does bring up another point, is I think there's more and more people that are, I think, enjoying short form, and not necessarily short form in terms of like just a short film, but like being able to take in episodic stuff where they only have to sit through an hour, as opposed to jumping into a 2.5 hour movie.
But there's forms for that, right? So I had this conversation with Dan TRON and Eric Sheely about Wim Wenders' Until the End of the World, the long version of that movie, which is 5.5 hours.
Right.
Which, if you watch it on TV, it's like a miniseries.
Yeah, exactly. Fine. Yeah. Well, I just watched the second Dune the other night, and I hate to say it, but I watched it in 2 sittings.
Right.
Because it's like 2 hours and 45 minutes, and it was like I started it in the evening, and it was like stuff comes up. I mean, I probably just should have seen it in a theater, I guess, but to some extent, it's like if I'm not able to watch it in a single sitting at home, then a theater is really just forcing my hand, right? It's like,
yes.
So and I'm not putting down the movie. The movie was very well done. There's grats to everybody on it. I'm not saying anything bad about it, other than I had to watch it in 2 sittings.
Right.
And it wasn't like I was like, God, I got to get through this movie. I'm going to wait because I need to take a break. Like I wanted to keep watching it.
Yeah.
I just didn't have time.
Right.
So it has nothing to do with like enjoying the story or not or whatever.
Right.
But to me, like if that movie had been broken up into like 3 episodes, it's more consumable for me with my schedule or whatever.
But you're not going to go to the theater and pay $25 for a ticket for a movie that's 1 hour long.
This is exactly my point, is that the consumption of hour-long episodes is more appealing. Yes. And I think that's one of the things that's driving box office down.
That's a good point.
Yeah. It's harder for people to go, I'm going to go to the theater, sit there prior to it starting, sit through the ads or the whatever, then watch the movie.
Movie theater experiences have really gone downhill. I'm sorry.
I didn't say it. But right? It's like, if you're going like, this is a commitment, right?
It is a commitment. And it's expensive.
It's expensive. It's a commitment. What happens if you have to pee? You're going to, you can't pause it. Like,
I remember my daughter's first experience, her first movie she ever saw when she was like, 4 or something like that. She went to go see, I think it might have been Toy Story 2 or 3. And she selected me, she goes, there's no pause.
Exactly.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So if you have to pee, do it now.
Yeah, exactly. So, when you see something that you want to see, like Dune, that's 2 hours and whatever it is, 230, 240.
Yeah.
And when it came out in theaters, I was like, I do want to see this on the big screen. Mm-hmm. I don't think I can commit to that.
Right.
Right. Like that's now a 4-hour investment of time.
Oh God, yeah.
Right. To drive there.
Although I did do this with Avatar too. I hate to say it, but I was like, I went to see it with my son, and I was like, in IMAX, and I was like, it's a big movie. And I was like, I'm never going to see this like this again.
Yeah.
I'm never going to see it on an IMAX stereo ever again. So I was like, I'm going to buy another ticket. I'm going to see it again this way. And
Right.
it's half your day.
Yeah, for sure. And the movies that I have seen in the theaters, are shorter movies that I enjoyed.
Sure.
Like I went and saw Barbie in the movie theater. I
loved
went
it.
and saw Dungeons and Dragons in the movie theater. I was like, this will just be fun, whatever.
Sure.
And I think Dune was a much better film,
Sure.
but just due to the commitment of it, I was like, I will watch it when at home. I've got a big TV. It looks nice. I can, like, it's just hard to sit for that long. That's a 3 hour at least in the seat.
Yeah.
Which is hard. And so I think, I don't know what the solution is in terms of if that really is truly something that's hurting the box office. Like, do you have things where it costs half as much to go to the theater and you watch an hour of something, or, like you buy a subscription to go see an episodic thing, you pay $30 to see Game of Thrones season 7 in theaters, and you go, every week or every other week, and you watch an hour of it and you enjoy it on a big screen.
Without ads.
Without ads. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like
amazing.
I could definitely see people going like, I'm going to buy the subscription to Game of Thrones or whatever, whatever.
The season. You buy the season. It's
Buy
like
the
season like going to the opera.
Yep. And you go watch it on a big, like how cool would that show have been on the big screen?
Yeah.
Right.
And you go every Thursday.
Yeah.
Oh, I gotta go. Yeah.
Yeah.
I got
Or you go
season tickets to Game of Thrones.
Or you go Saturday morning if you don't like to be in big crowds.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, can you imagine watching that in theaters as they came out?
Yeah,
like the Red Wedding.
Oh my God.
Like to be in a theater
when all that. Yeah.
Would have been amazing, right?
Yeah.
It would have been awesome.
Oh my God, this is a great idea. We'll see. Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking, and if anyone ever does this and makes a ton of money on it, then send a little bit my way. Yeah.
We have this recorded and timestamped.
But it seems like what the studios could be doing, or someone like Netflix, and I know they already exist on YouTube, is like make channels, but because I think there's going to be just this flood of content.
Sure.
Right. More so than we have now. But it's not just going to be like funny cat videos. It's going to be like narrative that people are telling with AI and with whatever.
Sure.
Make a channel where stuff gets vetted, so you're not having to sift through trillions of videos to find one decent thing.
Right.
Like people that actually vet videos, you can submit your videos, and if they go onto our channel, then you get revenue.
Sure.
Right. It's a subscription to YouTube. It's not like the free video. It's like a subscription.
Sure.
And based on the number of views, your movie is getting revenue, and you keep it to a containable amount that's organized by, the way you would organize anything like documentary or blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
But it's anyone can submit their movies, they get vetted, and then you are the keeper of this library of content that you then are paying out the people that put the movies up there.
Yeah, it could be.
And I know there are, collections on YouTube, like you can submit and get it on there, but I don't know if it's really you're sort of digging through like whoever wants to house that stuff. Whereas if you're like the Disney empire,
right,
like make your everybody section of Disney Plus.
Right.
Like this is where we've deemed this as something that we want to bring to our Disney viewers.
Yeah.
And now we're going to pay back those people that are making movies.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, cool. Well, thanks, Steve. This has been amazing. I think we got some good ideas of what's going to happen in the next 10 years and this journey that we've been on. And it's awesome to have you back on the podcast. It's been 10 years. Can you believe that?
Yeah. I can't believe that I guess technically like the third person.
Technically the third episode, but the first real interview.
The first real interview.
Yeah.
And now I'm the 500th.
No, you're the 500th.
And this is officially the 500th, not like the 507th or something?
No, it's going to be the 500th, right? Well, there are several episodes that are still going to be recorded, but I'm going to save this one to be 500.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And is it technically 500 or is it actually 500?
No, it's 500.
Okay.
It's 500. Yeah, for sure. So thanks, man.
I appreciate it. It's pretty cool to be sort of Well, I won't say first and last because it's still going.
You're not.
but-
It's not the last episode. No, it's not the
but
last.
first and 500.
First and 500. So yeah, 500 is a big deal. I think 500 is 10 years. Let's put it that year. 10
I
years.
am.
Also.
When you said it was 500, I was like, there must be a typo.
No.
That's insane.
Yeah. You remember that first episode, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Because like you said, I got in trouble for it.
That's right. Cool.
Yeah,
All right.
no,
Thanks,
super
man.
fun. Yeah. Well, thanks for driving all the way out here too.